Welcome to Whistleblower Network News. I am your host, Jane Turner, FBI whistleblower and advocate. It is our honor to share with you these experiences of real life heroes and people of integrity. And welcome to Whistleblower of the Week, Whistleblower Network News. And today I have to tell you, I am so thrilled to have on Zach Schoffstall. He's a FBI agent, and his story is so close to mine, it frightened me. And having just come back from North Dakota, and after being gone from there for 25 years and seeing some of the people that were involved in my case, it really reiterated to me how delicate it is working Indian country, how fraught with a lot of different things that are involved in that area, and how good an FBI agent you have to be to work that kind of a crime for the FBI. And here we have somebody who has an incredible story. And welcome, Zach. I am so excited to have you here because your story is incredible. And maybe you can start out by just introducing yourself a little bit.
Well, Ms. Turner, thank you very much for having me on your show. It is an honor to be on the Whistleblower Network. Zach Schoffstall. I was raised in a little town, Big Timber, Montana, in the county of Sweetgrass. You only get names like that in Big Sky country.
Yes.
I'm an only child. I grew up in a small house. My father ran a manufacturing business, building small single-shot rifles, Sharps and Winchester. I was part of that business from a young age. I can remember the building being built. Traveled the United States with that business. Fortunately, my father never expected me to take over the business for him. So I was able to find my own path, pursue my own dreams. I ultimately went to tech school coming out of high school and had a bit of a mind to build race cars. So I pursued 2 associate degrees at trade school. One was in engineering, one was in the machine trades. Lost my way a little bit trying to figure out what was going to happen after that, and ultimately decided to take those credits, because I had quite a few from 3 years of trade school, and transfer back to Montana State in Bozeman, which was not too far from where I'd grown up. Mm-hmm. Originally started in the mechanical engineering program, but it was mostly a pipeline to go to Boeing, which wasn't my dream. So in early 2001, I came home to my apartment one day and made a list of what do I want to do with my life. I think number 1 was likely race car driver. The path to that end was unclear. But number 2 was FBI agent. And then I had several other government jobs below that. I knew very little about being an FBI agent, other than it looked like a life that was more than just working and earning a paycheck. It was a life of making a difference. It was a life of substance and impact. I got on my computer and did a Google search or some kind of internet search for the FBI, and I called one of the FBI field offices in the region. I think it may have been Denver. And I got a hold of a recruiter and asked, I'm interested in becoming an FBI special agent. I'm in college. What does it take? And she said, well, it's a bachelor's degree plus a minimum of 3 years of work experience, professional work experience. I said, okay, well, I'm going to have to come up with a way to push through this bachelor's program. What's professional work experience? And she snipped that it wasn't flipping burgers. So I thought about that comment for a second, and I came back and said, well, what about the military? And she said, we hire folks with military experience and backgrounds all the time. Mm-hmm. So the call ended there. I went back to the university and interviewed with both the Army and Air Force ROTC programs. Being in the engineering program, the Army was trying to convince me of being a field engineer, and I asked if that was the gentlemen and ladies that cleared minefields, to which the sergeant replied, it sure is. So then I went down to the Air Force office, and I interviewed with a captain who talked to me about the Air Force OSI program and about the Air Force intelligence program. He also asked if I was interested in being a pilot, and I said I was not. I understood that there was a 10-year commitment for pilots after pilot school in the Air Force. And I had a goal of making it to the FBI. So I ultimately signed a contract and took on a scholarship with the Air Force. Changed my degree to political science because my assignments were likely to be based upon GPA, not necessarily what I was studying. And then 9/11 happened. And I stayed in the ROTC program until I graduated and commissioned at Montana State in 2004. I was an intelligence officer and arrived at my first duty station, which ultimately was Fairchild Air Force Base, in 2005. And I spent the next 3 years rotating back and forth between GWAT deployments in and around the Middle East and Southwest Asia and coming back here to the inland Northwest. When my 3 years had passed, I applied for the FBI Special Agent Program, and it took a year and a half. My deployment slowed it down, probably artificially to some degree. My last deployment was in Iraq for 7 months. And when I came back from that deployment, I picked up the vetting process. I already had a TSSCI clearance, but as you know, the Bureau does it all over again. But they still cleared me. I cleared the polygraph and cleared the physical fitness test, and ultimately was given a class position in September of 2008, which I attended.
Excellent. Now, I know that your first office could have been Salt Lake. Is that where they sent you, first office? Or did you have, what was your first office?
Sure. My first office was just down the road from Quantico. So upon graduation in February of 2009, I went to Richmond Division. I was assigned to headquarters city. Originally, I was on the Joint Terrorism Task Force with my background in terrorism as an intelligence officer during the global war on terrorism. And I investigated international terrorism, Islamic radicalization in our prison systems, looked at some allegations of Salafi extremism in Richmond for several years until I was able to move to the criminal squad, which at the time in Richmond, there were two criminal squads. There was the white collar criminal squad, and then there was the gangs, violent crime criminal squad. I was on the latter and was assigned to the Safe Streets Gang Unit Task Force. And I spent the remainder of my time in Richmond investigating narcotics trafficking, gangs, firearms violations, and other violent crimes. I was the first FBI agent in well over a decade that was asked and subsequently assigned, or I should say invited to, and subsequently assigned to the DEA task force. And I was also a member of the Virginia State Police Narcotics Task Force. I had a great time in Richmond. I saw the best of what the FBI could do. I also got glimpses of what the FBI could do that was not so glamorous, but it never quite seems to be real when it's not you. It is remarkable how our culture kind of tends to cover that up and make excuses for that. And we don't talk about those types of things. But I really did. I loved my time in the Bureau. I was a very busy case agent and loved every minute of it. I was invited to attend the SWAT team tryouts early in my time in Richmond, which I did, and was asked to join the SWAT team and ultimately became a SWAT team leader and a sniper and a breacher. And then gathered all of those usual feathers in my cap: firearms instructor, tactical instructor, active shooter instructor, or alert instructor. And after almost 10 years in Richmond, one of my first supervisors had become the assistant director, Dave Resch, of Training Division. And he asked if I would apply for a position at Training Division, notably in Hogan's Alley. When you and I went through, it was called PAU, Practical Applications Unit. Someone had changed the name of the unit to the Tactical Training Unit, but its mission was still the same. It was to provide practical instruction to students to apply their classroom skills in our role player infested Hogan's Alley.
How interesting.
So I did that for 2 years.
Yeah. Okay. So you're at Quantico for 2 years.
I did. I had my father, who still lived in my hometown and still ran the business, had some health issues. And in the process of a hardship 60-day TDY, I befriended the SSRA of Billings, Montana, who
Ah.
very much wanted me to come out and replace him at the end of his tenure as the Billings SSRA. The timing of that position did not work out. However, um, I was informed that the Coeur d'Alene SSRA position was going to be coming open. And when it did, I applied and I was ranked and subsequently interviewed for the position and was selected. And in uh, early spring of 2019, my family and I moved to Coeur d'Alene, and I took up the position as
Ah.
SSRA in the Coeur d'Alene RA.
So that's how you got there.
It is.
Gotcha. And were you an SSRA, a supervisory special agent, when you showed up there, or did you become it later?
Nope. I laterally promoted, so I became a GS-14 supervisory special agent when I went to Quantico as an instructor, and then
Okay.
I applied for the supervisory senior resident agent position in North Idaho. So it was a GS-14 to GS-14 transfer.
And coming out of Montana, Zach, you obviously had no fear of Native Americans. You had no fear of being out there in the so-called wilderness. It just was home to you, really, kind of, wasn't it? I mean, that's a beautiful area. I'm familiar with it. I went to school there. But it just held a lot of potential for you, didn't it?
Yeah, I wanted to come home. My
Yeah.
first child had been born when I was an instructor at Quantico, and I wanted to raise my children and bring my family back to the mountains of the West.
Yeah.
Um, I was generally familiar with the Indian reservations, having grown up in Montana. I had never worked
Mhm.
that type of crime. I knew plenty of agents who had worked Indian reservations and had taken those hardship transfers to get to Richmond. But I knew that I had a learning curve ahead of me for sure. I had never worked particularly close with victim services specialists, so I was eager to learn that piece
Right.
and provide a valuable service to those communities.
Excellent. And this brings back so many memories for me. It's just amazing. But so you're there, you're the SSRA, which you have responsibility for a territorial area, and you have Indian country within that territorial area, correct?
It's correct. I was responsible for, from the FBI's perspective, the 10 northern counties of Idaho, and I had two offices. I had a Lewiston office and a Coeur d'Alene office,
Mhm. Very good.
and we had three Indian reservations within that. You had the Nez Perce Reservation, the Coeur d'Alene Reservation, and then the Kootenai is a small reservation up near the Canadian border.
Yes, I'm familiar with all three of those. A beautiful area, beautiful area. And so you jumped in there. You're kind of responsible. You jumped in there. Salt Lake is way down the road. So you kind of get to do what works for you. Isn't that how it kind of worked? SSRA?
I certainly jumped in. That position was responsible for all of the FBI's investigative programs except counterintelligence, but I was
Oh,
also 10 hours from Salt Lake City and 8 hours from Boise. And I felt it was my responsibility, regardless of program, to build those relationships. And if it was a counterintelligence issue, that I could then hand that off uh, to the appropriate agents assigned with those
is
violations.
so
Um,
you obviously had to spend time cultivating law enforcement, had to spend time driving around your area, had to build up these relationships because that's the only way it can work in an RA. And you're the man, can also be the woman, but you were the man, correct? You were Mr. FBI.
I certainly took a leadership approach to my position. I'd
Hmm.
been an officer. I had my disagreements with the lack of leadership from my perspective in the bureau, and I felt that I should lead by example and cultivate relationships by example. North Idaho is an interesting place.
Yes,
There's a
it is.
long storied history of the FBI here, with
Oh,
Ruby
yes.
Ridge. And then, as you well know, Ms. Turner, there's a very complex dynamic with the tribes
That's
and the
right.
federal government. And we are a representative, as the FBI, of the federal government,
That is
both
correct.
positive and negative. And I thought it was important to understand that perspective that, I was there to do a job, but I also needed to recognize how that job and how I was perceived because I am a federal employee. I was there to
Hmm.
represent the federal government and enforce federal law. I did travel a lot. I put a lot of miles on
Hmm.
that government car, traveling back and
Hmm.
forth between my offices. All of the county, I knew all the county sheriffs. I knew almost all of the police department chiefs, and built relationships where I could build them. I had some great agents helping with that. I had some other agents that I was working on, obviously. Um, and I also was able to
Hmm.
successfully cultivate relationships with some of the legacy employees that were here from the FBI. And it gave me a lot of perspective in dealing with some of the personalities that I had to deal with because they were not, this was an interesting place. I had
Yes.
cut my teeth in the FBI in the capital of the South, in a city where it was the literal capital of the Confederacy and there were statues and monuments to Confederate generals, yet the city of Richmond is 80% African American. I thought that that produced a very interesting dynamic within law enforcement. Um, it was
Wow.
just as interesting, if not even more complex, in North Idaho between different partner
Exactly.
relationships, the tribes and their surrounding counties, um, the tribal law enforcement with the tribes, the U.S. Attorney's Office, and the FBI.
Hmm.
There's plenty of work to be done, for sure.
Plenty. And there's politics at play. There's all kinds of things. There's also a lot of suspicion. I remember when I came into Minot, I had one sheriff, I had 15 sheriffs I had to cultivate. One said, I don't believe women should be in law enforcement. I was like, God, sorry, I'm all you got. But they also had a lot of them had a bad taste with some of the previous FBI agents, and so it's a delicate balance, kind of, in terms of making sure that they know you're not there just to spend your couple of years and get out to something better down the road, which they're used to seeing. But you obviously you arrived in what year?
2019.
2019. So you build this wonderful relationship with all these sheriffs, AUSAs. Tell us what happened, obviously, and the tribes, which is critical because if they don't get justice, the only justice they're going to get is from what we bring them. So tell us what happened. You've cultivated this. People, obviously, from looking at your work, looked up to you, considered you an incredible FBI agent. What happened?
It's a great question. Um, I had some I had some great successes in building those
Hmm.
relationships with the tribes, with many of the sheriff's offices, and took the approach of transparency. Um,
Hmm.
I understood that many of those individuals, even the county sheriffs, have a very skeptical view of the federal government and of me
Yes.
as a representative. Um, so I sat down with them and said, "What you see is what you get." Um,
Hmm.
I am from Montana, and my desire is to raise my family in this region. So I am not, I expressed to them that my plan was not to do 18 months or 2 years in that position and then move back to headquarters, that my intent was to ride my time out on that desk and that I would likely have to step down and then I would finish out my career as an agent and that I was okay with that. And that resonated with a lot of people.
Zach, that's
And
important, isn't it? It's important to them. You're
it
not
is.
just passing through. Yeah. So you were there and they could see your sincerity, they saw your honesty, your professionalism, your expertise. So here you are, just you're just doing great up there in a very difficult area. I know that area. Very difficult area. What happened?
Well, before I even arrived in Coeur d'Alene, I had been forewarned of two of my biggest issues that I was going to likely have to deal with. Number one on that list was the U.S. Attorney's Office.
Oh,
The U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Idaho, which had a branch office or has a branch office in Coeur d'Alene, was notorious for a lack of aggression in cases, particularly in Indian country. My other issue that I was forewarned about was the FBI had a violent crime task force, a fair large number of task force officers, and their reputation for doing federal work and securing federal indictments had waned significantly in the years preceding my arrival. So, given that I was not looking for my next promotion,
or looking just to retire there doing nothing, which we've seen
I
out in our ways.
I took on problems. On the U.S. Attorney's Office front, I met with my senior mentor, an SSRA in Boise, and expressed to him some of the reservations and issues that I was having with the branch of the U.S. Attorney's Office in Coeur d'Alene. And he expressed that he had similar issues with his office in Pocatello and the leadership of the Pocatello branch of the U.S. Attorney's Office. And he encouraged me to develop a relationship with the U.S. Attorney's Office criminal branch manager in Boise as my direct peer. Because the branch office managers in the field in Coeur d'Alene and Pocatello they manage a small office of one or two other AUSAs, but then they're also functioning as a line prosecutor. His point to me was, you're not a line agent, you're a supervisor, and you should communicate as a peer with their supervisor. So I did that, and I was the first one to have ever attempted that in Coeur d'Alene, and you can imagine that ruffled some feathers with the AUSAs in Coeur d'Alene. I also leaned into some cases that I felt like needed to be prosecuted. One of the last ones, this will ring home for you, Miss Turner, was the rape of a 14 or 15-year-old Nez Perce girl. She had been drinking with her cousin, who was 28 years old, and she awoke from that without her clothes on, knew what had happened, yelled at him because the act had been completed, and she grabbed her clothes and ran out into the snow. She made it home. Her parents took her to the emergency room, and she was admitted. And one of my agents and one of my Nez Perce tribal police officers met her there and interviewed her. Limited facts. She submitted to a SARC exam by a SARC nurse at the hospital. Meanwhile, the perpetrator of the assault had also called 911 on himself and had given a bit of a confession over the phone and then a subsequent post-Miranda confession in the jail.
Wow.
He also submitted to a DNA swab of his genitalia, which came back positive for her DNA, and her rape kit came back positive for his DNA. Do you think I could get that case prosecuted at the U.S. Attorney's Office? I could not get that case prosecuted.
I don't know why not.
Well,
I
leaned
that's
pretty
better
hard
than a Christmas present. You had everything but a bow.
I leaned pretty hard into that case.
You had it wrapped up and
continued to ruffle some feathers at the U.S. Attorney's Office. So that is an example of
Zach. What was the declination? Why did they decline? What was the problem?
Well,
you had everything you needed. They had everything they needed.
I could not get a formal declination. What occurred is we wanted the juvenile to consent to a forensic interview by a forensic examiner at the Child Advocacy Center. Well, as you will understand the complex dynamics of tribal families, the aggressor in this case had been raised by the victim's mother. The victim's mother and husband received a phone call from an unnamed female assistant U.S. attorney in Coeur d'Alene. I was not aware of that call. My agents weren't aware of that call. Victim Services wasn't aware of that call. And tribal police were not aware of that call.
I
And that
know.
AUSA reportedly described to them how this was a complex tribal dynamic and might be best left for tribal justice, because if that gentleman were to be tried in federal court, he may well spend the rest of his life in prison. So
Oh
the
dear.
family subsequently had the daughter write a letter to the tribal prosecutor, asking the tribal prosecutor to not allow the feds to take the case federal, that even though he hurt her, she did not want to see him spend the rest of his life in federal prison.
Sure.
Um, to my understanding, that individual has never been prosecuted by either the tribe
Yep.
or the federal government.
Yep.
So,
And
I
Zach, may I interject something here, which is
absolutely, please do.
just sticks in my craw. Um, the Bureau is there. In my 15 years of experience on the reservation, I saw the Bureau as being a true representative to bring justice to people, mainly because the familial aspects of the reservation. Everybody's related to everybody. So the FBI is the only true arbitrator of what justice is. They're not married to anybody. We rarely live on the res. So we are a lot more clear eyed as to what's going on. And geez, everybody was related to everybody. I mean, it was just a mess. And that's what you get if you don't let the FBI do its job. That's what you get is a miscarriage of justice. This guy hasn't spent a day in jail for rape.
No,
Yeah.
correct.
So go ahead. So now we can see the United States Attorney's Office obviously is not
I think that
up to the task.
I bring you that story as an example of the complex relationship dynamics that
Yes.
existed for me as the SSRA.
Yes.
Um, I made it clear when I came into the RA that I intended to execute my job as the SSRA from a leadership perspective. That
Right.
I was not there to be everyone's friend. I would certainly
Right.
like it if we were all friends, but my job as the leader of the office was not to be everyone's friend. And I went through an inspection well prior to this, as the SSRA, and I got a mix of reviews. I had agents that said I was the best supervisor and the best leader that
Oh
ever
yeah.
worked for, and I had a couple that significantly disliked me.
Sure.
And on one end of the spectrum were the guys that were working really hard and were willing to take my guidance, and I was willing to step back and say, I have your back. You stay
Mm-hmm.
within this left and right limit, you guys go forth and conquer. And then there were
Exactly.
those where, for example, with the Violent Crime Task Force, where I said, hey, I need you to teach these TFOs how to make a federal conspiracy case.
Right.
Because these cases that they're putting together are not that, and they're not even being prosecuted by the county prosecutors. And the FBI, the federal tax force, paying $250,000 a year for this task force. The informants aren't going in the FBI books. Their cases are not
Yep.
being recorded in the FBI books, and you're statting every arrest that they make, regardless of what kind of case it is. I need you
Exactly.
to lead that task force and teach these guys how the FBI does business. And the response I got was, well, sir, you have to understand this isn't like any task force you've ever seen.
Mm.
And at that point, I'd been on 2 FBI task forces, a Joint Terrorism
Mm-hmm.
Task Force and a gang task force. I'd been on a DEA task force, and I'd been on a state police narcotics task force. I'd gotten some flavors of task forces at that point.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But to your point earlier, I had a job to do, and my expectation of
Exactly.
myself was I was going to be that leader, and I was going to do that job. I would take on problems where I needed to take them on, and I would support my agents in doing their righteous work, whether that was on the Indian reservations or in the community.
And Zach, you're exactly the type of FBI agent that not only should be in Indian country, but should just be out there working for the Bureau. I mean, you're exactly that type of agent. So let's hear how you got sideways, because I've read all these letters of commendation. I had a sheriff who said, he'd been there for years and years being sheriff of Montreal County, and most FBI agents he had ever met were just lousy and didn't even want to be there. And then here comes Jane, and she's great. So I understand. I understand what you're saying. Tell us how you got sideways when you're doing the bureau's work and you're doing it well.
Uh, the story changed in the summer of 2022.
Okay.
There was a planned, so we're coming out of COVID. There was a planned Pride event, an LGBTQ Pride event in the park in Coeur d'Alene.
Whoa.
Typically an annual event in
Mm-hmm.
Coeur d'Alene. And we, as the FBI and our partners, had been monitoring some general threat traffic related to that event. Most of it was coming from a local group called the Panhandle Patriots Motorcycle Club. They were organizing a counter event to the Pride event. Originally, it was called Gun to Lane 2, which, if you recall, during the Black Lives Matter protests and riots that were occurring the year earlier, in Coeur d'Alene, we made national news because it was Bring Your Gun to Downtown Coeur d'Alene Day, and we had all sorts of individuals show up in Coeur d'Alene taking their firearms for a walk, which is perfectly legal in the state of Idaho.
I
And
know it is.
nothing happened. So the counter to the Pride event was originally going to be a return to Take Your Guns for a Walk in Coeur d'Alene, or Gun to Lane, and they subsequently changed it to North Idaho Day of Prayer, I believe.
Okay.
They had their own permit, they were going to do a counter event.
Okay.
We were monitoring both, in just public social media posts and then through some other confidential sources, some generalized threat traffic from both sides, both the pro Pride event side and the anti Pride event side. We had been, as the FBI should, sharing that information within the rule book of the FBI with our local and state counterparts.
Exactly.
The Coeur d'Alene Police Department, which was one of my more prickly
Mm-hmm.
partners in law enforcement up here,
Mm-hmm.
decided that they were going to have a command post for the day of that event and that they were bringing all officers into uniform that day. They asked if I would participate in their command post, and I agreed. We
Yes.
had no specific threat traffic. I did not have any of my agents working that day, but I did have several of my agents feeding me information if they came across something, and I would
Mm-hmm.
generally tell them the tone of what was happened, with the understanding of they were not to be drinking, because if something did happen, I may call them to come to work.
Good
Um,
leader. Good leader. You are leading your troops extremely well. So what
so
could have gone wrong now?
what could have gone wrong? When I arrived at the command post, the chatter in the command post, which had the county sheriff's office, had state police, had the city police department in there, was that the city of Coeur d'Alene had received information from another police department on the West Coast that said, be aware there are 25 or more Antifa members in Coeur d'Alene and they are ready to do business.
Oh.
And for reasons that I still don't quite understand, the residents of North Idaho are petrified that Antifa is going to come to town and raise their city. So
I
they
hear
were
you.
on alert. They were on alert.
Yep.
A 911 call came into the command post that afternoon with reporting that a group of individuals wearing masks and carrying shields and poles were loading into the back of a U-Haul truck. And no one said it in the room, but we all thought, well, maybe there is something to this Antifa report.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
The police department and state police quickly found that U-Haul and pulled it over and brought everyone out of it. It was 31
Okay.
individuals. And my understanding to this day is that the chief of police made the decision they were all going to jail for something. And they subsequently charged them all with a misdemeanor conspiracy to riot, which is under the Idaho Disturbing the Peace statute.
Oh.
They were subsequently not identified as Antifa, but as a group called the Patriot Front, which is a white nationalist type of group that is known to travel the country and show up and protest and counter-protest around the country. That made news because the news had already been watching the traffic around that Pride event, and when this arrest took place, that made news. Well, I spent the next couple of days doing updates to FBI headquarters. The U.S. Attorney's Office was asking a lot of questions. And in particular, I had an AUSA that had attended the Pride event. And I knew she was going to attend the Pride event, and I knew that she had a child going through transition. She was very eager, as was her office, to originally wanted to find charges, federal charges for this Patriot Front group. But as I was writing these updates in the days that followed, I also was being provided information by our counterterrorism division, specifically domestic terrorism operations section, that the FBI was well aware of this group, had conducted numerous investigations into this group, to include in Salt Lake City, and that they'd been closed. This group was not known to be violent. They were not known to attack protesters, but they were known to be the protesters or counter-protesters, and at times had been attacked themselves and would leave given areas.
Yeah.
My management and I received emails from other offices that had conducted those investigations, from FBI headquarters. But the U.S. Attorney's Office, though they quickly became aware that they couldn't federally charge these individuals with a federal crime, they wanted to execute a federal search warrant for the phones and not allow the city to continue with its search of their phones. So I had authorized my agents to open what's called a 343V, which is a technical assistance to local law enforcement case. That is not a predicated case. That is simply an administrative file for the Bureau to provide technical aid to a police department or sheriff's office. I had met with the sheriff's office, with the police department, and they had indicated to me that they had a good grasp on the investigation due to those 31 arrests, but they would appreciate some assistance with downloading a bunch of cell phones and many video cameras that these individuals were holding. I said, well, we've got an administrative file for that, and I'm here to help. But the U.S. Attorney's Office was adamant that they were going to get a federal search warrant. I presented them with the conclusion of numerous FBI investigations that said this was not a violent group. They declined to change course. They wanted a greater conference call between the U.S. Attorney's Office and my management in Salt Lake and I, which we had. And I included on that call a representative from FBI headquarters who presented to the group that we've looked at this and we know this group, and there is no evidence that's going to satisfy a probable cause statement that they were there in Coeur d'Alene to riot. The U.S. Attorney's Office balked and said that they were leading this investigation and that we could not say that there was not probable cause before they'd had a chance to write a warrant. Ultimately, they were insistent that they were going to write the warrant and that we just needed to review it. They wrote the warrant, DOJ and the U.S. Attorney's Office. I assigned 2 agents to assist them and ultimately to review the affidavit. My agents were very uncomfortable with what they ultimately received from DOJ and the U.S. Attorney's Office. In effect, they wanted to characterize this group as, like all other right-wing extremist groups, that their intent was violent and that they meant violence in Coeur d'Alene, just like the right-wing extremist groups that attacked the Capitol on January 6th, to the point where they included pictures of the attack on the Capitol on January 6th, even though none of these individuals were under investigation for a January 6th violation, nor was this group known to even be present in Washington, D.C. on that day. My agents abided by all the instructions that they were given by the U.S. Attorney's Office and by me, but they also adhered to their oath and stated that this was not a good affidavit and that they were not willing to attest to it. They expressed that to me. I expressed that to my management. I had a phone call with the AUSAs, and that's when my management really started to walk away from me.
Oh,
I asked them 2 weeks after this event and after my agents had said they were not willing to swear out that affidavit, I asked for a conference call with my management team and it was declined. Instead, I was told I would draft them an email summarizing my phone call with the AUSA. I am not in the habit of summarizing phone calls with prosecutors, but
no.
that was an instruction from my supervisor.
Wow.
So I did as instructed. And I again requested a conference call. Where are we going from here? She
Right.
knows that these agents are not willing to attest to this. I was
Right.
again declined the opportunity to talk with my own management team and told, well, you have to email us what you think you want to do going forward.
Wow.
I did as
Zach,
instructed.
Zach,
Yes,
let me
ma'am.
let me ask, because I've been out of the loop here for a couple of decades, but my sister lives in Wallace, Idaho. I've been up in northern Idaho. And when did a federal law come into effect against just being an a-hole? Now, I do know there are a-holes in Idaho. I've seen them flying the flag up north there. But when did it become a federal law that you couldn't be one?
Well, in reality, Ms. Turner, is there isn't a federal law. Um, I referred to this group as a bunch of idiots in the back of a box truck, and that we may
Yeah.
find them to be stupid. We may
Yep.
find their actions to be stupid and their message to be repugnant, but that is not a violation of law. And they are
Exactly.
constitutionally entitled to be idiots and constitutionally entitled to say what they're going to say, just like the Pride event that we were there to support, lawfully
Exactly.
support.
Exactly. So
But,
far, I think you're a hero here. You're
well,
standing up for the rights of everybody, the pride people, the idiot people. You're doing what you need to do. Hi, we'll be right back with more of Whistleblower of the Week after a quick message from one of our whistleblower friends. Don't go anywhere.
Hi, this is Austin Handel, known on social media as Officer Ash, but also known as the Dunwoody Whistleblower, and the Vice Chair of the Lamplighter Project. The Whistleblower News Network strives to be the best source of information on important whistleblower stories. In addition to in depth interviews with whistleblowers, Whistleblower News Network provides timely coverage of breaking whistleblower news, detailed analysis of whistleblower legislation, court cases, and exclusive investigative reporting on government whistleblower programs. Subscribe to the Whistleblower News Network to stay up to date on all things whistleblowers.
unfortunately, we had a brand new U.S. attorney. This came at a time when the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, was expressing that white supremacy was the greatest threat to the country.
Oh,
And there has been obviously significant political push around the LGBTQ movement. And I believe that this was a confluence of personal interest in the LGBTQ movement and political
oh,
opportunism by the U.S. Attorney's Office to say, we're doing something in North Idaho. Facts be
okay.
damned.
Okay.
Um,
Hmm.
Ultimately, my attempt to stand between my agents and the U.S. Attorney's Office was declined by my management team. They told me that my agents, that they had spoken with the U.S. Attorney and that they were going to redraft the affidavit. My agents would support that redrafting and that they would review the second draft for probable cause. They did as instructed, and I did as instructed. And when a second draft was delivered, I separated my two agents that had been working on it for a month and said, you guys review it independently. I don't want any groupthink. Agent one, you're the affiant. I want to hear from you when you're ready. If you're
Mm-hmm.
good with this affidavit, no problem. We'll convert this to a predicated case and we'll move on. If you're not
Okay.
good with this affidavit, that's also not a problem. You just have to articulate to me why. Agent number two, you're the backup agent. When I've heard from agent number one, I can hear from you and get your opinion as well. They ultimately both came to me and stated that there were some significant factual inaccuracies in that affidavit and that it concluded in a premise that was not supported by the facts known to the FBI. They were not willing to
Okay.
attest to it.
Okay.
And I said, understood.
Mm-hmm.
You guys have other work to do, go and do it. And I messaged my management team and they were unwilling to accept that response. I said, you will
Okay.
not pressure me to pressure these agents to redraft this affidavit until they change their minds. This is now twice over the course of a month
Wow.
that they have worked on this. They've already expressed their uncomfortableness and their unwillingness to attest to the accuracy of this affidavit in the first draft, and this is the second draft. To push them to continuously redraft this is just telling them
Wow.
that they will work on this problem until they eventually say yes.
Ouch. Ouch.
I was then instructed that I would give it to another agent in the RA and that they could review it and attest to it. And I said I would not do that. This is not a good warrant. My agents have expressed to me, and I've expressed to you, that
Right.
this warrant is not supported by the facts. The premise of this warrant is not supported by the facts. They're the only agents, it's half of my RA of 4 agents, the 2 have worked on it for a month. Giving this to another agent that hasn't worked on this case at all is simply
Right.
asking him whether or not it reads well. And if it
Mm-hmm.
reads well, then attest to it before a federal judge. I will not put an agent in that position.
Yeah, that's a bad thing. Zach, explain an affidavit, and when an FBI agent swears to it, signs their name to it, what that means.
Absolutely. When you are seeking a search warrant or an arrest warrant from a criminal complaint, a federal magistrate judge typically is going to authorize that document. The document will be accompanied by a sworn affidavit or a statement of the
Mm-hmm.
facts by the agent. Now, it is not a creative writing exercise. An affidavit is a collection of the facts.
That's
It does
right.
not need to be all of the facts, but if there is exculpatory information or information that would not lead to the conclusion that the agent is attesting to, that information needs to be included in the affidavit. For example, if you
Right.
have information in your affidavit given to you by an informant, and the informant is known to lie or has been caught in a lie before,
Mm-hmm.
the agents are trained that that information needs to be included in the affidavit. You
That's
can
right.
include the information provided by the informant, but you also have to include the accuracies and inaccuracies that that informant has provided in the past. Every agent that's come through Quantico and every agent that has spent any time working investigations with the U.S. Attorney's Office knows this to be fact, knows
Mm-hmm.
this to be law. Those agents are swearing both in their signature and will raise their hand
Right.
before a federal judge, typically a magistrate, that the facts presented in their affidavit are accurate and that they are attesting to its
Right.
accuracies. And if the affidavit includes a statement that says, I believe there is probable cause of a federal violation of 18 USC or 21 USC, whatever, that is accurate to the best of your knowledge.
Right.
My agents were not willing to do that, and for good reason.
And that's important. You're putting your name down, saying this is the truth and nothing but the truth. So that's important. Your name goes on that document.
Absolutely.
So
But
now oh boy, now you're at a standoff with your
I'm in a
management
standoff.
team in
I
Salt
will no
Lake.
longer I will no longer
Oh boy.
pressure the 2 agents to continuously revise the affidavit, and I will not find another agent that doesn't know the validity of the contents to blindly review it and consider attesting to it. I
Sounds
was
like we have a case of integrity here, Zach.
well,
I,
there
sounds
was
like you have
significant
integrity.
well, there was definitely some lack of integrity across the table,
It
unfortunately.
sounds like it.
What I didn't
So,
know
uh,
was that behind all this was a conspiracy between the AUSAs, a female FBI supervisor, and my management team for another supervisor to attest to the affidavit herself, even though at this point she'd never read the affidavit. She didn't know who wrote the affidavit, nor had she reviewed any of the previous FBI investigations into this group. But she had informed management that she was willing to attest to it herself and not
wow.
assign it to one of her own agents. So the next
Wow.
morning, I was contacted by my management team in Salt Lake City and told that this case that this search warrant was such a big deal that it was now on the Deputy Attorney General's desk, Lisa Monaco, and that they had lost confidence in my ability to lead the squad through that case. I was to
Right.
immediately transfer that case to this female supervisor in another city, in another AOR, and that I was to no longer speak about this case. I was to have no further communications with the
Wow.
U.S. Attorney's Office on this case, and neither was my squad. They weren't to speak about it amongst themselves, and they weren't to talk to the U.S. Attorney's Office about it, effectively trying to place a gag order on everybody.
Wow.
Um,
So
I did
much
as
for
instructed.
integrity there, Zach. So much for
Oh,
integrity. Woo.
uh, Ms. Turner, I'm sure you went through this phase knowing your
Hmm.
history. It is shocking.
Shocking.
And the organization that you have committed so much of your life to, and
Hmm.
who culturally has convinced you to place it up upon a pedestal,
Yeah.
can no longer see right from wrong, can no longer follow
Yeah.
the facts, and is not willing to support the decisions of its own agents and its own supervisors under the pressure of Main Justice and the U.S. Attorney's Office.
Mhm. So, Zach, tell me about the politics involved in this, because this is purely political. So, boil it down to its essence. What the hell was going on with the politics here that they felt very secure in running over the people on the ground who had the intimate knowledge and the perspective? What politics were involved here? This is just cuckoo.
I think the politics are pretty simple. You've got an emphasis coming out of Main Justice, so
Hmm.
DOJ in Washington, D.C., that white supremacy and white nationalism is the greatest threat to the country.
Okay.
There is an obvious attempt to support and promote the LGBTQ movement, and
Okay.
you've got a brand new U.S. attorney. This is an opportunity for a brand new U.S. attorney, Mr. Hurwitz, to make an impression upon the Department of Justice.
Sure.
And that also happened to coincide with personal interests of some of the AUSAs that participated in the Pride event. This is the only instance that I know of because I was a participant. But having spoken to many other FBI agents over the last few years, I am aware that this is not the first time that Main Justice has flexed its muscles on the FBI to get what it wanted, whether that was the
Hmm.
suppression of the Clinton Foundation investigation, whether that was the search of Mar-a-Lago, whether that was dictating tactics and uses of SWAT teams in arrests of January 6th subjects, etc. Um, I just happen to know this one firsthand. And I
Yes.
watched in amazement as my management team and even my headquarters went from sending me emails that they do not support any agent being pressured to attest to an affidavit that they don't believe is factually accurate, because the Bureau has a history, in their emails they say this, the Bureau has a history of after the fact realizing and having agents state in internal investigations that they felt pressured to swear out bad affidavits, and
Mm.
included the Crossfire Hurricane investigation as an example, that they went from sharing that with me to this is an important search warrant because it's on the Deputy Attorney General's desk. We've lost confidence in you.
So I assume the retaliation was quick, brutal, and just
Yes.
okay. Tell us
Well,
what happened. You stuck your flag of integrity into the soil, and it sounds like did Hades descend on you right away? Did they take this long, ratcheting down of your performance evaluations? There's a whole series of things. Did they say you embarrassed the bureau? Did they tell me how they put the thumb screws to you?
it happened very quick. I
Oh,
was
it's quick.
removed from the investigation on a Friday. What I didn't know and know now is that by Monday of the next week, my management team was talking with security division, inspection division, and HRD, putting their plan in place.
Yes.
Uh,
Wow.
Approximately 10 days or less, 10 days with the weekend after I had been removed from supervising that search warrant effort, I took annual leave. While I was on annual leave, I filed my first formal whistleblower complaint with the Department of
Good.
Justice Office of the Inspector General. I also received a call from my counterparts in North Idaho, the first one being from the captain of the Idaho State Police. He had just left an hour and a half long interview with two members of my executive management team in Coeur d'Alene, and I didn't
Yep.
know they were in town.
Yep.
And he said,
Here
Zach,
they come. Here they come.
I don't know what they're going to do, man, but whatever it is, it's not going to be good. He's like,
Yep.
they were trying to get me to say that you had somehow ruined everything in North Idaho.
Oh, yes.
And it didn't matter what I did. I
Or
didn't seem to
said.
be able to persuade them otherwise.
Yes.
I heard
Yes.
from a police chief in the Coeur d'Alene area that expressed the same setup, as he referred to it.
Yes.
Well, by Thursday of that week, so the Pride event was June 11th, 2022. I had a performance check-in June 2nd of 2022, which was Zach has an exceptional understanding of the leadership competencies. He has great relationships with his partner agencies. He's well on his way to accomplishing. He's already accomplished almost all of his performance objectives for the year. To by Thursday, middle of July, I got received a phone call from my direct supervisor and the SAC. The SAC informed me that I had embarrassed him and embarrassed the Bureau, and that he had lost confidence. There it is.
There
he
it
had lost
is.
confidence in my ability to lead, and he was talking to headquarters about it. When I questioned him about that, he got audibly angry and cut me off.
Yep.
And I simply said, "Sir, I'm sorry, but I don't believe what you're doing is being made in good faith, and I don't trust it. And you should know that I've already filed a formal complaint with the Department of Justice OIG for the actions of the U.S. Attorney's Office, DOJ, and your executive management team." And all he said was, "Thanks, Zach, that's your right." And the call was ended.
Yep.
I continued to work. I went back to work, and to the day, on August 3rd, I received, without notice, 2 failed to meet all performance expectations and competencies hit my HR file. And the SAC and my supervisor were in my office 2 days later. And their simple explanation was, because of those 2 performance check-ins, I could no longer be the SSRA.
Yep.
I was to leave the office immediately. I was to take my laptop with me and work from home until they came up with a TDY. I was to cease all communication, all professional communication with the office, and I was not to re-enter the office without prior coordination and permission. I did as instructed, and I took my laptops and I went home, and I was given a menial task the next week to do until I received another email, middle of August, that I was to report to CJIS and work in the threat call center for 90 days on the other side of the country from my wife, 2 children under 5, and my ill father, who I was also the caretaker of.
Yep.
And I forwarded that email to Deputy Director Paul Abate and said that I have already filed a whistleblower complaint and this is retaliation. My attorney and I then drafted a letter that we sent to Congress and also sent to Director Wray, informing him that this was retaliation for prior protected disclosures, that this was wrong, and that all of this was because I refused to suborn perjury and pressure my agents to attest to a bad affidavit. I reported to West Virginia as instructed, on time, as instructed. And within days of my arrival, the end of August, I received a loss of effectiveness transfer request EC, where the SAC and one of his ASACs alleged that I had ruined relationships in North Idaho to the point that no one would work with the FBI anymore because of me. And the only solution was to permanently remove me from Idaho. They accused me of all sorts of performance and personal
Mm-hmm.
accusations. I was a liar. I couldn't work with women. I was a failed leader and a toxic leader. I couldn't communicate.
Yep.
Um, Pretty gut wrenching to read that.
Yeah, it
And
is. It is gut wrenching.
fortunately, I had a strong attorney, Kurt Susdak, as I was
Mm-hmm.
sitting in my hotel in West Virginia, and he said, "I know that sucks,
Mm-hmm.
but now is not the time to sit in your room and cry about it.
Yep.
You have to draft your response, and you have to see who will send you a letter to support your response." And as I forwarded you, I
Mm-hmm.
subsequently sent in approximately 3 dozen letters from
Mm-hmm.
local agency counterparts, from the tribes, from police departments, sheriff's office, child advocacy center, and former FBI and DEA agents. I
Mm-hmm.
had an EAD, SACs, ASACs, supervisors I'd worked for. I had 2 agents that had worked for me in Coeur d'Alene and had retired. And I had a slew of agents that had worked alongside me over the 15 years I'd been in the Bureau at that point. And they all said the same thing effectively of I was someone that took my job extremely seriously and I executed
Mm-hmm.
it well and with vigor.
Mm-hmm.
And
I read the letters. I read the letters, Zach, and they all say that. What an outstanding agent you were, your integrity, what you provided. I was particularly impressed with the tribes coming through and saying, what wonderful things you'd done on their reservations. I mean, it's just a loss. It's a loss to that community. It's a loss to the state. It's a loss to the reservations. I'm sorry it happened to you. It's unfair and it's ugly. They have no compassion or anything else. They will simply slit your throat and let you bleed out. They don't care. All those letters, they don't care.
no, I also believe they knew what they did was wrong and they needed
Mm-hmm.
to find and establish
Cover.
me as their scapegoat for they
Yes,
had no other recourse but to the issue wasn't a bad search warrant. The issue was a bad supervisor, was their mantra.
exactly.
And when I refused to quietly go away, they just continued to amplify that message.
Zach, I'm going to ask you, because I totally agree with you. The cover up is much worse than the crime with the Bureau. And I still to this day struggle with why they are so intent on protecting, the bosses, the supervisors, the executive team. What is it that, it's just, the 11th commandment, don't embarrass the Bureau and protect the executive team. Explain that to people, why that exists.
Hard for me to say the why because I don't agree. But I believe you will likely recall, as I do, that the indoctrination into the FBI culture starts the first day at the academy.
First
You
day.
are told you do not embarrass the Bureau.
Yeah,
And if the Bureau wants to get you, it will
it
find a way.
will.
That is a message that is clear, it's loud, and it's repeated. And
But
I
but
think
Zach, they
when
also talk about fidelity, bravery, and integrity. And when you
certainly do.
represented all three of those, this is what you have this dissonance. They talk about fidelity, bravery, integrity. That's what you represent. And yet, when you do those three things, they'll cut you off at the knees.
And that's where I think there is a divergence within our culture. I believe personally that the Bureau hires some of the best Americans that America has to
Hmm.
offer. But I believe personally that the vast majority of those hires stay at the bottom of the Bureau where the work is done. And that it is not the best of who we hire from American society that becomes our executive management.
I
And
agree.
that culture over decades has formed a significant divide within our own organization. Ms. Turner, you and I both know that FBI headquarters could turn into a ghost town tomorrow, and the field agents will continue to show up and investigate cases
Yes,
and do their job in the field until the money runs out.
that's right.
Yet, a greater than 50% of the Bureau resides at headquarters. And that's a problem. That's a real problem. And that's a cultural problem that gets to some of the bigger issues that the Bureau faces today, and that I think we have a hopeful chance to see change in a new generation of leadership within the Bureau. I've seen a couple of good people have gone up in the ranks of the FBI and become executive management, but they too will admit that they are the exception and not the rule.
Yes.
Those benches are extremely thin. And not only are they thin, the Bureau does not have a culture of identifying, training, and developing leadership as a competency. We talk about leadership. Leadership is supposedly a core tenet of what we hire, but then it's never again developed. And if you don't develop it within the unique cultural requirements, work requirements of the FBI, you're not going to have it. You don't get to have something that you don't invest in. And if you don't invest in a culture of leadership and leadership accountability, what leadership is, then you're leaving people to their own devices and whatever it is that they brought to the table. And I go back to my previous statement of the best of what the FBI hires from American society, by and large, does not go up that flagpole. It stays at the bottom of the flagpole.
Yep.
It's where
Does
the
the
best
hard
jobs
work.
are.
Yep.
That's where the hard work is at. That's
Yep.
where the reward is at.
Yep.
And the Bureau leadership model, management model, requires people to move and uproot their families. And I think that the best of us don't want to do that or have limited tolerance for that. It is not going to be easy. And I think it will be an entire generational, and I mean like a 20-year career generational effort to try to produce a better leadership environment within the executive management ranks of the FBI. You and I both know, at least I'll say this, I'll take the statement on just myself. I do not believe that what makes the FBI exceptional is the bureaucracy. I believe that what makes the FBI exceptional is the people that we hire to do the work at the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
We hire really good Americans. I've historically hired really good, hardworking, intelligent, diverse background Americans that get into those communities, bring the legal tools to bear that they need to, and they investigate violations of Title 18 and Title 21. And they do an exceptional job at that. And they use the tools of the Bureau to do that. But don't conflate that with that's the Bureau being excellent. That's people being excellent and exceptional people doing that work within the Bureau.
Mm-hmm.
You never embarrass the Bureau loses that. And I think we have lost that entirely, that it is the work of exceptional people at the bottom is what we all live off of. When I was an instructor at the academy, I've worked very hard to try to instill a sense of purpose and a sense of respect for what came before them. So you're a new agent trainee, you're very excited, you think you're the hotness, you've been selected to become an FBI agent, you were one of however many thousand applicants, and you're now one of a few hundred new agent trainees. And you're thinking about walking across the stage to get your credentials. And I would sit my classes down in Hogan's Alley towards the time of their graduation, and I would say, you're going to walk across the same stage that I walked across, and you're going to be handed the same credentials that I was handed. You, someday soon, are going to get the very first opportunity to show up on someone's doorstep and open up those credentials. And you will likely have immediate respect of some sort from the person you interact with. They don't know you and they don't care anything about you. That respect is from all of the other agents that have opened those credentials in front of someone for 100 plus years before you. Remember that. But also remember that your job, your oath of office that you are going to take is to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States.
That's right. Against
all enemies, foreign and domestic. And I would read for them one of the most powerful letters that I will occasionally reread myself, and that is Benjamin Franklin's written appeal to his constituents during the Constitutional Convention, asking them to support and ratify the Constitution. And his words are powerful. And I would read a good 2/3 of that to them to understand and give a framework for what is it that you're swearing an oath to uphold and defend. It's an idea. It's a concept of liberty and of justice and hard work. All the people that came before us to build what we have today, and the hard work of you of protecting and defending that. And I think that when you have a culture of leadership in the Bureau that is overly self-serving, looking for their job and their connections beyond the Bureau, not looking to make waves, not looking to fix problems, to perpetuate pounding square pegs into round holes, that all of that is lost. And I believe it has led to a cultural corruptness within our executive management that allows for, and frankly, likely encourages, the abuse of employees below them to suit the personal interests of those above. Because the personal interest of those above is smooth water. And if water becomes rippled and anyone gets a whiff of quote unquote embarrassment for the Bureau, the marching orders are, you will squish that bug.
Squish it. Hard.
Very much
Squish
so.
it. Absolutely out of existence. Tell me what your future is, Zach. I mean, here you are, a man of integrity, honor. What are your plans?
It's a complex question, Ms. Turner. I ultimately defeated the loss of effectiveness transfer with those letters and my documented performance. The management tried to place me on a PIP. That was ultimately denied. The only person that ever came close to apologizing to me was the assistant director of human resources division, who said, "I'm sorry, Zach, this isn't how we should treat our people." CGIS, on their own, decided to send me back home, where I worked for them remotely. And while I was so toxic that I could not be allowed in the Coeur d'Alene RA, CGIS paid me to travel the country as their salesman ambassador. And I visited all of the Western offices, all the headquarters offices, and most of the resident agencies selling particular programs of CGIS. And I was lauded for those efforts. And unfortunately, though, there was no end in sight. That TUI would be 60 days, then 90 days, and then renewed again, until finally they used the OPR process to say that I had failed as a leader and a supervisor, and that my judgment was so poor that it rose to the level of significant misconduct. And they didn't care what headquarters had told me.
They terminated you.
Me. They terminated me.
What was the date of your termination?
The letter was dated the late July, maybe approximately July. I don't have it in front of me. Approximately July 23rd of 2024. I received it via FedEx 2 weeks later, and that was my official notification. No phone calls, no emails, no anything from any member of leadership. My father died 16 days after I was served with the letter notifying me that I was pending dismissal. No phone calls, no letters, no emails from anyone in the chain of command. Plenty from my peers that knew what was going on in my life. As a matter of fact, and let's talk for a second about how strong our peers are, but how they have to live in fear of this executive management machine. In 2023, I'd been removed from my position as SSRA in August of 2022. In 2023, it was time to elect FBI Agents Association representatives for field offices. And my name was put forth to contest the current FBI Agents Association rep in Salt Lake City. Wow. And the agents of the Salt Lake City division elected me, persona non grata, a name which could not be spoken of in the office, elected me as their representative. Because agents know the difference between right and wrong. Agents on the ground. And there was enough of them that even though all of executive management was also an Agents Association member, and I can guarantee none of them were voting for me, the agent's voice was strong. And no doubt that really had to piss off a lot of executive management in the Bureau. Because then I got to send emails to the whole division anytime I wanted to. Now, I
I
didn't take
love it.
advantage of that, but they knew who I was. They knew I had their back. Agent involved shootings, somebody having health issues, didn't matter. If there was something that the Agent Association could do, I was their representative and I would get it done. So, to answer your question of where I'm going from here,
Yes.
my father died in the middle of all this, and he had been
I'm
of ill
sorry.
health before that. I noted that I'd grown up in a small business, C Sharp's Arms Company. My father took a perfectly good hobby and he ruined it 50 years ago by making it a business. He never expected me to take it over, but he never built himself an exit. There's a lot of me tied up in that business. So I am now the president of the company. And even though I made a promise to my wife that I wouldn't move her from Coeur d'Alene because she's an attorney and a very well
Mhm.
established career here, and we moved her parents here, I drive back and forth between my home here in Coeur d'Alene and Big Timber, Montana, and I endeavor to run that business and run it well. I have my many administrative and potentially at some point court fights against the Bureau,
Mhm.
and we'll see where they lead. And we're also hopeful, optimistically, for a new future for the Bureau with some new leadership. I guess to put a dot on that I, my hope for my future is to go all the way back to that little note I made myself on my table in college, which was I want to live a life of impact, significance, and where no matter when I leave this earth, I feel really good about what I did. I feel really good about what I did in the Bureau. I feel really good about providing a job to my employees and about providing a legacy, high quality, handmade American product to our customers. But I'm not done with that. And I would very much hope to lend my voice, as ever small as it might be, to the efforts to make the Bureau what it should be for the people that work in it.
Zach, you are really what an FBI agent should be. So no matter what happens, you are the best of the best. They can't take that away from you. And I really appreciate you being on the program. We're going to follow you. I hope you don't mind. And we're going to have you back on to tell us uh, eventually what happens to you because
You bet.
the story is not going to stop here. This is too important. And I thank you for coming on.
Well, Jane, I thank you for the work that you do and the work that you've done. I very much appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and speak to your audience. And I'm a firm believer that you can't lose if you don't quit. That's an easier statement made than lived at times.
Yes.
I try not to give a voice to my internal anguish and pain
Ugh.
of what it's like to go through some of this over the last couple of years.
Mm.
But I am pretty dedicated to finding the growth that will come from this. As a person, as a father, as a husband, as a leader, I will and have grown from this. I have a, I am extremely fortunate that a lot of people believe in me,
Mhm.
have stayed by my side. Um, I'm fortunate that when times were really good, I made friendships in the bureau and other law
Mhm.
enforcement agencies that stood the test of time when things were not so fun.
Mhm.
Um, and now I really feel for my friends that are still in the bureau because they're scared of the
Yep.
environment that they've been working in. They're optimistic of the future, but they're also scared of the future too. I think you and I both
Mhm.
know that the only thing that law enforcement likes less than the status quo is change.
Exactly.
So it will be there will be some tough times ahead, but I am hopeful that with the right advice and the right leadership that some will really be for good.
Zach Schoffstall, you are a hero. You're a whistleblower hero. And thank you so much for being on the program. A man of integrity, honor, fidelity. The Bureau has lost a great agent. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. It's my pleasure.
Thank you for listening, and please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. If you want to read more whistleblower stories, go to www.whistleblowersblog.org. Music by Rachel Kilgore. Editing and booking by Anissa Sheikh and Victoria Thompson. And a special thanks to our sponsors, Whistleblower Network News.
I think you'll find that it's just as hard to stand up tall as it was when you were small. The truth is hard.